Welcome into this latest edition of In the Loop, with a podcast dedicated to bringing you the latest news and insightful interviews with the leaders of the leisure industry. My guest at this time is Taylor Jeffs, the co-owner, president, and chief creative officer of Legacy Entertainment. Taylor, welcome to In the Loop.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
I'm looking forward to this really nourishing discussion for sure. Firstly, I think logically for people, take us back in time. How did you enter the leisure industry?
I wish I had, a story that was less anecdotal, that could be, spread or used by anyone looking to come into the industry. But I think something that's so unique about our industry is that everyone has such a unique story about how they came into it, and no two are kind of the same. I came in, over 2 decades ago. It's a very different time now. Now you have lots of great kind of inlets. There's different. Many colleges are offering courses in themed entertainment design. But back, again, 20 something years ago, that was not the case. So everyone kind of had to find their own way in. With me, I just grew up obsessed with the industry, wanted to get into it, from a very young age as quickly as possible. So growing up here in Orange County, California, the kind of obvious route for that, even if it wasn't, didn't have a clear ending, was working at Disneyland. So I found a way to work there when I was very young in high school, I think around 15 years old, getting high school credits instead of money. And then that led to, I always say it wasn't even flipping burgers. It was below flipping burgers at one of the restaurants. And then that led to guest relations. And that was a great way to learn the industry, talking to guests every single day about their experience and what they liked and what they didn't like. And that was so formative. And also just Disneyland is a master class in design, right? I mean, everything about that park is perfect. No other park has even come close to like replicating that specific magic that park has. So that was kind of the education. This was also right after the September 11th attack. So the industry that there was had kind of evaporated very quickly after that, just because I'm sure you remember, there wasn't a lot of international travel happening. Everyone, every major operator suffered a great deal in that period. But for me, that ended up creating a window of opportunity to kind of step into the industry. There was a company called Landmark Entertainment Group back in the 90s. They were kind of the biggest player in the industry. It was formed by Gary Goddard and Tony Christopher. Both of them had gone separate ways, and Gary had formed, again, in the wake of 9/11. Again, there wasn't a demand for these giant companies anymore. So he started a very boutique company called Gary Goddard Entertainment. But there was also very little work at the time. So I kind of solicited him and said, "Hey, I'll work for free. I will show up." This was IAPA Orlando 2002. I said, "Just pay for the hotel and I'll do everything else. I'll show up, just eager to kind of get my foot in the door." And he took me up on the offer, and I started at that convention, and then started interning shortly thereafter. But it was an exciting time to begin because we didn't know this was going to be the case. But that was kind of the ground floor for the rebuilding of the industry, and a lot of amazing things that came pretty quickly thereafter. We started doing work with Six Flags and Hershey's. Georgia Aquarium is one of the best known projects of that era. And then we really exploded in Asia, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about today. That's kind of where most of our business is now.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating insight for people to get into the industry and see how there are possibilities of getting in for sure. Obviously, want to touch on your company of Legacy Entertainment. What is the origin and core ethos of Legacy Entertainment, which has led to exponential growth in the international tourism and hospitality landscape?
Yeah, so for a little bit of background, everyone knows Walt Disney Imagineering. Most people in the industry have heard, of course, of Universal Creative. So these are the kind of in-house groups that do the design for the Disney parks and the Universal parks. That's kind of the high watermark standard for the industry. Everyone in the world wants that, but very few operators and developers can afford that, to have an in-house team of that level of quality. So they have to hire companies like us to kind of come in on a project by project basis, to provide whatever they need. That could be the design of an entire park. It could be the design of an attraction. It could be in a restaurant even. I always say if there's a popcorn cart and it has a design challenge or some a creative challenge, we would take that on. So that's really fun that we have a neat variety of work that people, we're an entertainment design company. Again, there's a handful of us in the industry, fewer than 10, really big good ones. And we'll tackle any sort of creative project that we're approached with. That could be, again, a theme park, but sometimes it's also resorts or casinos. It could be aquariums, museums, dark rides, icons. We've done music festivals. So anything
Wow.
under the entertainment umbrella, which is neat because it keeps it fresh. It's always something, in any given year, we might do three or four or five distinct projects, and everyone could be something different. That we're doing a aquarium for Vinpearl and a theme park for Lotte and a dark ride for Trans Studio all at once. So that it's never boring. It's a lot of fun. Oh, and Legacy's thing, I think every company kind of has their kind of strength or market that they've carved out for them. We are very strong in Asia. That's kind of our territory. Um, Again, some groups focus on domestic work here in the US. A lot of folks right now are focused on Saudi Arabia and everything that's been happening there the last 5 or 6 years. But we've always been strong in Asia. Asia is big enough that we believe it will always be substantial. There will always be something to do in Asia. So we've really focused on maintaining our stronghold on that market. And again, for the last, gosh, at least 15 years, that's really been our home base.
Versatility is very much the watchword for your company, and no 2 days are
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
same, are they? Different projects
exactly.
and different
Yeah,
places. It's amazing.
it's what keeps it interesting. Absolutely.
For sure, absolutely. Having designed and produced more than 50 major entertainment projects globally, what has been the key defining moments which has shaped a successful business for Legacy Entertainment?
That's a good question because it's interesting that the beginning is the hardest part, as I'm sure everyone who's at any point in their career will agree with. Getting the first thing is the toughest, and then kind of once you do that, and if it turns out well, success breeds success. So, um, a long time ago, we're talking over 20 years ago, we opened the Georgia Aquarium, which our company conceptualized. This is in the earlier form of the company, conceptualized, but then that leads to Shanghai Haichang Ocean Park, which again, many people probably haven't heard of that, but it's the main competition for Shanghai Disneyland. This is a giant kind of SeaWorld style park in Shanghai, close to Shanghai Disneyland. And then that turns out well, and that leads to Beijing Haichang Ocean Park. That leads to the Seashell Aquarium at Vinpearl. And there's a bunch of examples like that where we did a little parade in the early 2000s for Six Flags that turned out really well. And then that led to a big parade for Lotte World later on. So, um, again, the most challenging thing is building the portfolio. But once you have that, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of as long as it's of quality, as long as it's filled with successful projects, you'll be tracked down by the people that are serious about finding success for their projects as well.
This is a really interesting and fascinating question I'd like for you to answer here. What
Sure.
is the thought process behind designing a visitor attraction? I imagine how does this begin? What's the brief? How do you brainstorm? What goes into designing a visitor attraction?
That's a very good question because, when I was young and aspiring to be part of the industry, if you're a kid in school just daydreaming about this stuff, it's all about what rides would I have, what roller coasters would I have, how cool will I do what
Totally.
IP would I use? Yeah. And then when you get into the industry, of course, you learn that it's much more than that. That as I always say, it's an art and a science, and they have to work together. It can't just be one or the other. And it's interesting working around the world because different cultures maybe are fixated on different aspects of the industry. One example, we've done a lot of work in Korea. Korea is all about the technology, and they're just a hyper focus on what's high tech about this and what will be the technology used. And that really is the wrong way to approach a project. And they've had a lot of failures in Korea specifically as a result of leading with technology first. Um, a lot of people think that we are, like a ride manufacturer, a roller coaster supplier might come to us thinking that we are kind of, the first step in the process, thinking that we might have our finger on the pulse of the industry more than anybody else. And in actuality, there's a step before us. There's the feasibility study step. So there's a lot of firms out there. There's ECA and AECOM and Proform, all these companies that do. Again, this would be the very first step a developer would go through in creating any type of new leisure attraction from scratch. Maybe not opening up something new in an existing park, but creating something new in a market. And they would be engaged to tell the developer, what can this project be? How big can it be? What will the annual attendance be, which therefore drives what will the investment be? What will the per capita spending be? What are people going to spend on food and merchandise when they're here? So that can be very sobering because it really puts things, and we'll talk about some specific examples, I'm sure, later, but it really creates the entire framework for your project. And just one example is we designed, so Lotte World, for anyone who doesn't know, is South Korea's largest theme park. Their flagship park is in Seoul. It's been there for 35 years. And about a decade ago, we were approached to create the second ever Lotte World for a city called Busan. This is the second largest city in Korea, but it's a very small city compared to Seoul. The Seoul park is an icon for anyone who knows it, of course. It's a park that does between 5 and 7 million people a year. That's one of the top attended parks in the entire world. That's not a Disney or Universal theme park. For a city like Busan, you're not going to see those numbers. Therefore, you're not going to see that level of investment. So a feasibility study would tell you, hey, really, if this park is going to be successful, you can only spend, maybe 200 million US dollars to create an entire park, which is, again, a huge creative challenge because, Disney, for example, will spend $400 million or more on one attraction. A park will be in the multi-billions of dollars.
Wow.
So, the feasibility comes first, then we get involved. We'll see it through to the architectural stages, get local architects and local teams involved, and then see it through to the opening day.
It's a fascinating process. I imagine that
Yeah.
when you plan this, all the plans you think there are going to be a plan, somehow you have to change the plan and be adaptable and versatile. I imagine with
Yeah.
that.
Yes. No project, again, I've been doing this for over 2 decades. No project has been a straight shot. There's some projects that are closer than others, but no project has just been a perfect, smooth ride all the way through. But that's how life is, right? I mean, that's we're
Totally.
just yeah, challenges are thrown at you and you figure out how to address them and hope because you can't it is, my mentor would say, like you can't stand at the project's gates and apologize or explain away, to everyone arriving. The project has to exist on its own and stand for, itself once it opens. So yeah, you hope that all that pain is invisible to the audience and because it's just they don't care about the infrastructure or what it took to get water and power to the site. It's how much fun are my family and I having today? So yeah, it's every project's a challenge, but it's never boring.
No, absolutely. It keeps you on your toes, but as long as you find a way and
Yeah,
flexibility
yeah,
and that's the main thing for sure. You
exactly.
mentioned about Lotte World in Busan. Another one
Yeah,
attraction that I would like to hear about is in Vietnam with
yeah,
the seashell aquarium. A
yeah,
fascinating look for anyone that's not seen it. Incredible design. Talk to me about the master planning and overall
yeah.
architectural design of this attraction. What was the brief? What technologies and expertise made the difference? And what did you learn that you've applied since?
Great question. So, for anyone who's not familiar with the Vietnamese market, which is, a very important market right now, there are two big players. There's Vinpearl, who we're talking about now, and there's another group called Sun Group, and they're the two main players in the Vietnamese market. We were first approached by Vinpearl, again, almost like 8 or 9 years ago, to create the biggest and best aquarium in Vietnam. Um, so again, it's really interesting the kind of information you might get at the beginning of a project. And this one, the brief was we're building a flagship theme park, a Vin Wonders theme park, which is their theme park brand, on Phu Quoc Island, which is a major tourist hub in Vietnam. Here's where the aquarium goes. And that's basically it. They also had an idea for how to master plan it, which was maybe it can be broken up into a bunch of different pavilions that guests could walk throughout, but you'd have to go outside to go, transition between one building and the next building. And we explored that just to be respectful of that vision. But then we also said, here's another option. of what if it's all under one, facility? What if it's all in one building? And here are the reasons that that would be, we think, advantageous. They agreed with that, so that was good. The next thing was, what does it look like? What's the storyline? What is the reason for doing this? I like to give a lot of options. You never know what's going to strike somebody. So I think we did, probably 8 to 10 completely different ideas for what that facility could look like. Some were, more organic, like fake mountains, and we had a like kind of a futuristic sea base. One was abstract idea of coral. But the one that ended up being selected was, having spent some time in Vietnam, I know that, you always get into the local culture and the local mythologies and stories and all that. And turtles are very important in Vietnamese mythology. And the city of Hanoi, where Vin Pearl was based, there's a famous lake and it has a whole legend about the turtle that lives in the lake and all that. So we did a couple ideas about turtles and what if this looked like a giant turtle. And we sent off all the work and it made its way up the food chain of the company. We weren't even there to present it, which is very strange. But it came back down that the chairman loved the turtle. We're going with the turtle. So that's how we ended up with that. And then it became kind of what kind of turtle is it? We did some more that are, we did some that are more modern. We did some that are more literal. And what ended up getting built is the literal version. I think maybe that was the takeaway from the project, to answer that question, that I preferred personally some of the more contemporary concepts that were very elegant and sleek and cool. And I respect the client, they know their audience. What they decided to go with was a more literal turtle, which again, if that's not what I would personally do, but I'm not the audience. They know the audience. The audience is families, the audience is locals, the audience is Asia. Um, and it turns out they were 100% correct on that. Um, that aquarium has been so successful that it's strange when I'm in China on business, I will see ads for the seashell aquarium, which is just a little bit surreal. But it's really nice that it's been so successful. I
Absolutely.
was a
For
big
anyone
fan.
that's not
Yeah,
seen it, it's a fascinating attraction on 3 floors, and the design of
yeah,
the turtle is incredible. You wouldn't think it would be
yeah,
possible, but it's a really,
yeah,
really work of art for sure.
yeah,
If we fast forward to nowadays,
yeah.
what are the latest attraction innovations at Legacy Entertainment that obviously you can say and comment a little bit about?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We're always kind of, story and theme first. I know, again, we talked about technology a little bit. A lot of companies are, what's the latest technology? But that doesn't age well. Again, if you went to IAPA 10 years ago, for example, or, between 15 and 10 years ago, it was all about VR and everything, everyone, there were VR water slides and VR roller coasters and VR parks. And it's like that aged like milk, right? It's, anyone who, and we knew just because we had gone through this back in the 90s, there was a VR wave back in the 90s and nobody wanted it back then. And we knew nobody's going to want it this time. Um, so we're very careful to not jump on kind of trends or bandwagons too quickly. There kind of has to be a proof is in the pudding. Like we have to be able to go, I'm a big fan of the industry too. It's not just, I don't just work in it. I love, experiencing it as a guest, especially now that I have 2 young daughters. Um, and kind of, that gives you a gut check of what works and what doesn't work and what people respond to and what they don't respond to. Um, I hate to say it, there are a lot of folks in our industry that don't go to the parks and experience them as guests. So it's all kind of up here, theoretical. What would somebody else like versus what would I like and what would my family like? So that's how I approach design. With that said, to answer your question, again, story driven and theme driven. What is a world that I want to be part of? Where is a place that I would like to go? What's a story that I'd like to be part of? We're working on a theme park now in Asia that is all based on holidays. And it's funny, it's amazing that nobody's actually done this on a grand scale. I mean, here there's a couple parks in the world that have done that, like, you know, in a regional park format, like a Holiday World here in the States, of course, has done that, and they're wonderful. But in terms of blowing that idea up and doing it on a Universal or Disney scale, to me, that's super stimulating of what would a Halloween land look like, or what would a Valentine's Day land look like. So that's a great creative challenge. And I think to kind of close that out, we also want to create projects that are timeless. We can't create things that are really cool for the first 5 years and then, go out of business in 5 or 10 years. That's not an option. So, we'll never do something that's of the moment. We will do things that have the ability or potential to last, hopefully 30 or 40 or 50 years, if not longer. They will grow and evolve. But kind of I look at our job as laying the foundation and giving our partners a base that is successful, a solid foundation from which they can build, and then we turn it over to them and they get to run with it.
It actually touches on my next point, actually,
Yeah.
about long-term loyal audiences and
Yeah.
stimulating them. What types of experimental attractions do you think can build long-term loyal audiences the best?
That's a really good question because it's always evolving, right? It's interesting to look back at our industry and what are the classics, and also to question why they're classics. That the things that were built, not just Disney, but all over the world. There's so many dark rides that have been around for 40 or 50 or 60 years, for example, that have that timelessness, the longevity that are still beloved today. And a lot of that is nostalgia that parents that grew up going on these rides as kids are now taking their kids to ride them. So that's important. Um, but it's interesting. I think creating these immersive worlds and stories. Again, you look back at some of, like, I think of, like, Blackpool or Knott's Berry Farm that have these rides that again are 40 years old or more, and they're so simple, but they still work. Whereas a lot of things that are more technological that have opened since then have gone on to close. So sometimes, kind of simpler is better, I think. That we try to, I think, often overthink things when maybe the answer is lying right in front of us. An example that I come back to is at my hometown park, or my local park, Knott's Berry Farm. They have a tremendous immersive theater experience called Ghost Town Alive that they've been doing for almost a decade now, where they have live actors populating the ghost town section of the park. And it's so analog. I mean, there's literally no technology at all. And it's one of the best things that's been done in our industry in years. And it even exceeds, kind of what maybe Disney and Universal's top immersive, in terms of immersive entertainment, live actor activations. It even does some things better than what they've done. So I think, again, to answer the question, I couldn't say exactly what it is, but I think my kind of takeaway is that you don't need a mega budget, a Disney or Universal budget to do something well. Again, sometimes we overthink things, but it's just what will the audience respond to? It doesn't have to be something that costs $400 million. It can be something that costs $10 million. But as long as it's special, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned about intellectual properties, IPs. They play
Yeah.
obviously a pivotal role in modern day attractions. How
Yeah.
obviously been based a lot in Asia. How has IPs been received and embraced over in Asia?
That's a great question about Asia specifically because it's very different from the rest of the world. So, you look at around the entire world, all the top attractions, not just theme parks, the top attractions are IP based. And that seems like such an obvious sell, but believe it or not, it is not in Asia. Just because it hasn't been the case historically. And there's kind of an aversion. I don't know, there's just an inherent like ick factor to giving up part of your profits for a license that doesn't have maybe a tangible value, but it has an intangible value. But of course, there is a value, and it could be an incredible value depending on the IP. But it's so interesting. A lot of places, like obviously Japan, figured this out a long time ago, and that probably owes a lot to Tokyo Disneyland having opened up in the market again over 40 years ago at this point, and then that paved the path for everything that's come since then. Whereas in China, for example, there's been a huge, almost impossible to sell an IP-based project in China. Um, and you look at China is always evolving. Over the last 20 years, it is completely fast. It's a different country now than it was 20 years ago. But think about how many dozens of entertainment projects have opened. And the Wandas, these are huge Chinese operators, and the Fanta Wilds and the Evergrandes, who, they, it's crazy. If we had this conversation 10 years ago, how different this would sound than it sounds now. Um, and they all resisted IP and, suffered a great deal. as a result. Whereas in the same market, Disney and Universal have come in to great success. In Shanghai, specifically with Shanghai Disneyland, is an unbelievable success. That's been, 10 years ago this month that opened, and that's been embraced so well. And the per capita spending is so incredible. It's numbers that we never would have imagined were possible in China. And Universal is doing very well also. So I'd like to think that that will, even though it's been 10 years, it will happen. That will inspire all these other developers to look at that and go, hey, like, let's replicate that model. Maybe not on that scale,
For sure.
but let's identify some IP that are available and figure out how to do them well. Um, Same thing in Korea. There's been a huge resistance to IP. And I mentioned Lotte World, who we've worked a lot with over the years. They're finally with Sally Dark Rides building their first IP-based attraction in the park's 35-year history, or of an international IP attraction, which is a Kong and Godzilla Dark Ride, which is a great idea. If it's done well, that will drive the gate. That could be something that's timeless, that's beloved 20 years from now. So I hope it's a huge success because I want to see more of that, and I want to see others inspired by that and to also follow that path. So yeah, again, it's fascinating how it's different everywhere in the world you go, and in Asia where we're focused, in each country specifically, how they respond differently to IP.
Absolutely. It's a very inspiring industry to be in general. And
Yeah.
for those people, those budding visitor attraction enthusiasts that would like to get into the industry, what
Yeah.
pathways does Legacy utilize to encourage the next generation of professionals?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because how we started is different for everybody. But it's a good time to come into the industry. I know there's a lot of questions and nervousness about where things are going with AI specifically. But um, I don't see anybody in our industry being replaced by that so far. I don't see it happening at our company ever, hopefully, because it's interesting to touch on that, and then I'll answer the question more directly. Um, it it's going to change our industry fundamentally. It already is. Whereas this morning I was looking through a package from a potential client where they've done a lot of creative already, and they're bringing that to us and saying this is a starting point, but you need to build upon this. The good news is it's horrible. So like, and hopefully they don't see this and or know who I'm talking about. But just AI so far, and again, I don't see this changing for a long time, cannot replicate human creativity. It's a great tool. It can save us a lot of time. It can help focus our effort to make sure I've used it as a tool to make sure we don't go in the wrong direction, which allows me to put more budget into the correct things. Instead of wasting money over here, I can make this even better than it would have been over here by putting the whole pot over here. Um, so in terms of getting in the industry specifically, it's a really good time for it because so much is happening. Disney has publicly said that they're investing $60 billion in their parks over the next 10
Wow,
years. So that takes a lot of people to make that happen and will create lots of opportunities for people to enter the industry. Universal's expanding like crazy, building parks all around the globe, which is very exciting. Need lots and lots of people to make that happen.
for
And
sure.
then with companies like us, um, a lot is happening, with us and our competitors in the Middle East, and we foresee that happening for a while in Asia, same thing. The advice that I would give is probably focus on being really good at one specific thing for sure that applies to our industry. Whatever your passion is, um, something tangible is ideal. Like just the first example that comes to mind for some reason is like landscape design. That's something that is in demand for great master planners, landscape designers. Graphic design is still very important. There's a million disciplines. I shouldn't name any specifically, but if you are really good at something specifically, that will help you to find opportunities to get in the door. Um, I think the thing to be aware of if you're coming into, again, if you're going to Disney and Universal, you might wear one hat. If you're going to be targeting the rest of the industry, a lot of us are smaller companies. We don't have, nor can we afford to have hundreds of employees. So um, our employees are expected to wear multiple hats. Nobody basically does just one thing. So just have an open mind and have a good attitude, and just more and more doors will open, and also your skill base will broaden and strengthen.
For sure. Absolutely. Right, now on In the Loop, it's time for a bit of trivia with Trivia Time,
All
where we
right.
put our guests on the spot, so to
All
speak.
right.
So we'll fire a few questions to you here. What has been the most satisfying project you have worked on? Obviously, so many projects you've been a part of.
Hmm.
Can you think of one
Yeah.
specific?
The most satisfying one was also the most challenging one. It was a parade we created for Low World that I mentioned. It was called Let's Dream. Huge success, ran for 10 years, which was the lifespan of it. Unbelievable success with the park. Increased nighttime visitation by 30 something percent and spending just double digits. But the entire project is, I say I'm glad I did it, but I would never do it again. The whole thing from concept to opening was done in 6 months. We had groundbreaking technology. We were the first use of drones, and they didn't work at all, which was, figuring that out was just a total, I'm not going to say cluster, cluster what. And we had a client, that senior leadership was very enthusiastic about the project, but our direct reports were against the project. So that created a very interesting dynamic of trying to open in 6 months, a groundbreaking project with new technology, never been done before, where your client does not want the project to succeed. That's never happened before. That's never happened since. I would never want to do that again. But the fact that we put ourselves through hell and the project turned out great was very satisfying.
Worth it in the end.
Yes. Yeah.
Worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Okay,
Sure.
if you could travel back in time, what period would you revisit and what would you change?
Oh my gosh. I would go back to the classic, the big World's fairs that existed before I was born. So like the 64 New York, even, or even like the old seaside parks, Coney Island, Luna Park. But I'm talking like turn of the century through like the 1920s.
The golden
Because
era.
yeah, you saw the scale of those parks were insane, and these rides that could only exist in that moment, these giant, insane rides that were completely not safe. That's nothing, but the ambition of it was really cool. And we don't see that. I mean, we don't see that scale anymore. So that what would I wouldn't change anything because I wouldn't we're in a good place now. So I don't want to mess that up.
Away from your work, what do you
Yeah.
like to do in your spare time?
Well, it's funny. I have two young daughters, 8 years old and 4 years old. So a lot of it's, entertaining them. So theme parks are a big part of that. So that's, we have a lot of great parks here in Southern California. So no joke, even though I work in the industry, my favorite thing still is to probably have a day at the theme parks with my daughters. That's, as good as it gets.
It must be lovely to you to actually work in the industry and then for your family to, yeah, see
Yeah.
what you're seeing and then gauge their opinion as well. They're the audience
Well,
of like what is popular nowadays.
it's so valuable. It really is. Each visit is research, and then what also something that's super fun in that regard is bringing the kids to IAPA. And I assume most people watching this probably have heard of IAPA, but if you haven't, every year in November in Orlando, it's the main convention for the entire industry. There's little smaller ones all around the globe, but the big one, the mothership in Orlando, is completely unbelievable. I've been going for over 20 years. I'm still blown away every single year. It's never gotten old. It's every single component that goes into a theme park. The rides, the turnstiles, the food, the games. Um, it's incomprehensible. Whatever it takes, I would recommend anyone who loves our industry to show up and see this at least once. It'll melt your brain. But it has been especially fun taking the kids to that because in their mind, that's where I work. So it's like in their mind, their papa works at the real world equivalent of Willy Wonka's factory that I go to. In their mind, I go there every day and we just ride roller coasters and have ices. So, yeah.
I've been to two IAPAs in Vienna and
Yeah.
Barcelona. It gives me a little idea of what
Yeah.
people tell me about Orlando, which is
Yeah.
enormous compared, and these are really big in Europe that are gaining traction
Yeah.
every year,
Yeah.
but the Orlando ones are ginormous.
Everyone, including yourself, has to do it at least once. It's a requirement.
Absolutely. I think I know what the final question here is going to be, but I'm going to ask this anyway. What is the
Yeah.
one thing you are most grateful for?
Oh, yes. It all full circle. Um, I love having a job where the goal is to make people happy. And that's just it's as simple as that. Like, every job has good days, every job has bad days. And creating these projects is not easy at all. In fact, it's often, I'm not comparing myself to anybody, but this is has to be one of the most complicated jobs in the world in terms of when we do the theme park, for example, it's every discipline in the world, every leisure hospitality discipline in the world brought together in one space. So we're not just doing one thing well, we have to do 10 things well, that we have to do, the attractions, which are complex on their own, but then we're doing restaurants, which is its own skill set. We're doing retail, which is its own skill set. We're doing operations, which is its own thing. We have, mini hospitals and infrastructure and electricity grids and just all this stuff that is super complicated, and it's challenging. But then the end result is as simple as creating magic for children and for families. So that's really neat, to create things that people like and that hopefully outlast me if we're lucky.
Well, I think that's a lovely way to end this podcast. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Taylor, for your time.
this is wonderful. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, that nicely ends this latest episode of In the Loop. So thanks for joining us, and stay up to date with the latest in the leaders of the leisure industry, where, as always, we will keep you in the loop. Bye for now.